to accurate energy efficiency information and homeowners and professionals through managing the Home Energy Score program and the Better Building Workforce Accelerator. So Madam Madeline, thank you for joining us. She received her master's in public service from the University of Arkansas Clinton School of Public Service and worked on residential efficiency in solar in Missouri, Arkansas, and rural India. Welcome, Madam Madeline. Next, we have Madam Charmaine. Charmaine Brown. She has basically, Charmaine is recognized as a diversity and inclusion leader throughout the country. She's a leader. She previously led Fannie Mae Diversity and Inclusion Engagement Outreach in its Office of Minority and Women Inclusion for the last decade. She spent 24 years in housing and financial services. She has a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University. Additionally, she's accredited and completing the diversity management program at Cornell's ILR School, as well as the Harvard Kennedy School of Executive Education, Diversity and Inclusion Leadership. She's also currently serving as the she's the Director of Diversity and Inclusion of the Mortgage Bankers Association. Welcome, Charmaine, to this panel. Next, we have Mr. Spriggs, Dr. Spriggs. He's an economist, professor at Harvard University, and chief economist for the ALF-CIO. And he's going to come to us. Dr. Spriggs has some great economic information and data that he's going to break down to us in this session today that I'm sure everyone here will be able to take some things back to their community to create this ecosystem that we're going to talk about. So welcome today. At this time, I'd like to welcome our panelists. But before we get started, I wanted to share something, and I have a question. When we talked about this ecosystem, I want to start, and I think we'll start with Charmaine. Charmaine, if you can elaborate a little bit on this ecosystem when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to the African-American community.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Third Vice President. It's so nice to be here with you all and to see you, Madam First Vice President, Madam-elect, and the other panelists, and all of you who are joining us. I think this conversation is so timely, and I've enjoyed working with you, Danny, on framing it and thinking through why it's really important that we actually start looking at our problems as we talk about the Black community in holistic ways and holistic terms. And that's why we're talking today about the ecosystem. You framed it as the seed and the soil. We have a system today that we are now seeing outcomes are interrelated and interconnected. So while I don't know what the Webster's definition might say, what I do know is if we are talking about the Black community, we can no longer afford to talk about the domains and the societal issues in segmented and disparate terms. We can't talk about housing without talking about employment. We can't talk about employment without talking about education. We can't talk about education without talking about health. We just can no longer afford to have these conversations where we are focusing on things in myopic ways, because when we do that, we are not getting to the root cause and the root of the problem. And so that is why when we say the seed and the soil, we have to look at things in interconnected, interdependent ways. Because if we don't do that, what we'll have is a system where we think we have solved the problem only for the problem to re-emerge in other ways. So we've got to be able to look at these issues holistically and I believe examine root cause and structural issues if we are really going to solve the problem.
Thank you. Thank you. Great information. Great information. I want to talk a little bit about this ecosystem as it relates to your role, Madeline. If you could share with us, some of the things that you guys are working on and how it relates to the African American community or the Black community.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Danny. It's an honor to be here talking to NAREB members across the country today. So really appreciate it. And I have to say the focus on the word ecosystem is really exciting for me. Before I studied public policy, my initial degree was in environmental science. And so, the definitions you were looking up about marine biology and things, I think are the ones that first come to mind for me. I think about all of the ways, and like Charmaine was saying, there's interrelated issues that contribute to the outcomes we're seeing today. And, if you think about a ecosystem with a forest, you might try to grow a plant and it's not succeeding as you would hope it would. And then you find out there's a deficiency of nitrogen in the soil or something that you can't even tell. Everything else seems fine, right? The sun is there, the water's there. But if you're missing little bits and pieces that maybe contribute to that, organism success in the most scientific terms, you're not going to see as good outcomes as you would hope or as you might imagine. So as you mentioned in the wonderful introduction, I work for the U.S. Department of Energy, and I'm focused on education, access to information, access to financing, and workforce, all related to how we get energy efficiency and clean energy into homes around the country. We find that there's overall, a lot of America's housing needs support to have affordable energy bills. And we know, as Charmaine mentioned so eloquently, that energy is connected to all of these other issues. If you have a home with poor energy supply, you can see horrific things like what we've seen in Texas most recently, but even more subtle things where people maybe don't have access to the best indoor air quality in their home, and that contributes to their health outcomes. So we also know that all of the issues that can be connected to energy use in homes also disproportionately negatively impact Black Americans because of the history of systemic exclusion that has occurred. And so I'm honored to be here. I'm also honored to continue the conversation with all of you about what are ways we can better ensure good access to information, good access to financing, and good access to resources so that we can make sure our housing is working for all of us in a way that's affordable and healthy and higher performing.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Awesome. That's great information. Madam Courtney, First Vice President Courtney Jones, can you break it down and tell us why is the ecosystem important in the Black community?
Thank you so much, Danny. I think the ecosystem is so important because it creates a holistic approach to solving problems. And to Charmaine's point earlier, the problems in the Black community due to systematic racism are so complex, it really takes a holistic approach to actually solve them. Here in Houston, we are utilizing a concept called complete communities. My firm works a lot, as you mentioned, in community development and redevelopment projects. And we work a lot with our current mayor here in Houston, Mayor Sylvester Turner. When Mayor Turner was elected, I had the honor of being a part of his transition team when he came into office and being a part of the housing committee and chair of the subcommittee for small business and economic development. One of the key things that came out of our transition team meetings was after an assessment, what we found was that mayors before had come up with strategies to increase affordable housing with programs to build on infill lots. Another mayor came up with a program to increase jobs and workforce development. Another mayor focused on partnering with the school districts to do more in education. but none of those programs moved the needle as far as they expected them to or wanted them to. So what Mayor Turner decided to develop was a complete community approach, a comprehensive approach to community development by really building an ecosystem. This is one that is designed for underserved communities in the Houston area, revitalizing those communities with new housing, with new retail, focus on decreasing crime, improving schools, bringing jobs and technical training into the area. So this ecosystem approach or holistic approach is proving to be very effective in the Houston area. We have two projects specifically that my firm is working on. One is for a old middle school in a predominantly African-American area that was closed down due to enrollment and test scores of the school. We're taking that school building and we're creating an empowerment center with it. In that empowerment center, we will have a pre-K program to teach students how to read early. We'll have a workforce development and technical assistance program. We'll have a community room for community events and training classes. We'll also have a business incubator there. We have a similar project on the other side of Houston that's called the Edison Center. This is a dilapidated, blighted grocery store that left the community about 15 years ago. If you go to that building or have been to that building the past 15 years, it's blighted, prostitution, drugs, etc. is happening. Through the Complete Communities program, we're working with Mayor Turner to redevelop the Edison Center into a very comprehensive approach. We will have a full medical facility there that will have pediatrics, adult care, and senior care. In addition, we'll have a performing arts, exposing children in this area, which is a predominantly African-American area, to arts and after-school programs. We will have a business incubator there also too, and we're working very hard to have a banking and financial center there. So again, creating this idea of not just tackling one problem, but how do you create a holistic approach is really, to me, the concept of creating a successful ecosystem.
Wow. You guys are doing a lot of amazing things, Madam First Vice President, and that's great vision that you all have as well from the top down. I mean, and that goes to show that how important it is for us to participate in these different boards and things along those, so we can share the insight, and be the industry professionals in that specific area. Dr. Spriggs, I have a question for you, a statistical question that says, basically, the wealth and home ownership rate in the African American community today is the same as it was prior to the Fair Housing Act of 1968. How do you explain this statistic?
Thank you for having me, and thank you for that question. We have to be honest. There is a tendency in America to think that no harm can happen to Black people. This we saw constantly throughout the summer because we had to protest that our lives matter. But it's another way of saying our pain matters. And the tendency when it comes to policy is the same, that we could systemically deny you opportunities for homeownership, that we could systematically discriminate against you in loans, and that wouldn't matter, that it wouldn't create any damage. And let's create a myth that the past is past, and let's just shake it off and move on. This is dreaming. We are back where we started because the system has a way of recreating itself. So what determines the credit score that makes someone eligible for a prime loan? And therefore, what market gets delegated to harsher loan terms? What determines which neighborhoods will get realtors to push so that home prices can go up? What determines, from a banker's perspective, those neighborhoods where they feel there's a greater risk? All of this are part of the system. And the system can appear to be race neutral because no one mentions race anymore. We don't see race restrictive covenants. But we shouldn't believe that the system can't statistically identify the markers when they are as extreme as they are. So in addition to being back to where we were before 1968, when we tried to end discrimination in the sale of homes, we're at a point where the home ownership of a Black college graduate headed household is lower than a white high school dropout. And that's the legacy part. That's the part where we say, well, let's just pretend that's not true. And so you have to think of the entire system. What's the down payment I need? Well, if your legacy is that even a white high school dropout has access to a home because they inherited the home and therefore have access to down payment assistance. If the legacy is that a homeowner from someone who's better educated gives them enough equity that they feel comfortable that they're not giving up their retirement when they say to their child, here's $10,000 to help with your down payment. When we ignore that we're not starting from the same place, when we ignore history, then we're saying, oh, we didn't hurt you, Black people. You're fine. Just pick up your bootstraps. When we do that, it's bad policy and it's harmful. It is in many ways what got us the 2006 crises, because it makes people believe that this is about them and not a system, that all they need to do is to be aggressive and seize the opportunity. And given the structure, if the opportunity is, I don't get loans from anybody else, but these people are offering me loans, and I don't pay attention to the fact that the only loans I'm being offered are actually dangerous, I'll take them. Because I'm being told that it's on me. I should be the one making the aggressive steps to become the homeowner. And we saw how dangerous that was because we wiped out our wealth. It disappeared. And that's what put us back. That's what put us back to before 1968. So we can't ignore the past, and we have to have solutions that acknowledge the history of the gap. And we need to put on the table, if people don't want to do something that's restorative, if people don't want to do that, fine, but then come up with a solution that addresses differences in the ability to make down payments, differences in income, differences in the way in which we structure the loans that end up accepting far more white homeowners and delegating far more Black homeowners into disadvantaged loan conditions.
Wow, that's great information. And to that leads why our policy efforts and advocacy is so important as it relates to these topics when we talk about the credit scoring and the different disparities that we face. With that, I want to ask Charmaine a question. So, being that Black communities are impacted the most, what steps can we take to address the disparity and change the narrative?
Oh my, what a great question. And what Dr. Spriggs said was so rich. I think, first of all, we have to recognize that in a racially structured society, inequity looks the same across systems. And what I think Dr. Spriggs alluded to, but I will say a little differently as it relates to the narrative, is truth matters. Truth matters. When I, as a Black woman, have a perceived risk just by virtue of being Black, that's a problem. That's a lie that I have to spend my entire life fighting. We are all born into a system in a racially structured society that tells us where we belong. Another data point that I think speaks to this issue of perceived risk, and by the way, when I am included, it's more likely that it will be predatory inclusion, right. But I'm supposed to be very happy to be included. Despite the terms, right? A Black woman with a JD, MA, BA is more likely to suffer or to experience or have higher infant mortality rates than a white high school dropout. The point I'm trying to make, Danny, is we are fighting not only the realities of these structural issues, but also who is telling the story? Who is representing my truth? Who has the pen on this? And when you look across systems and you look at the fact that at the end of the day, even with Dr. Spriggs's point about Black Lives Matter, why do we have to say that if there isn't an inherent, right, an inherent belief that somehow I am less? So I think in looking at this problem holistically, we also have to reclaim the narrative. We have to put a spotlight on the truth. We have to talk about these issues in plain terms, right? Even though when you say Black Lives Matter, people respond to it as though you're saying something that's somehow offensive. But why do you need to say it? This perception of inferiority is what's there, this devaluation. Just look across systems. My house is going to be worth less than, a white family's home, right? And there is an economy that's being made off of perpetuating these myths and these lies. There is now a market to serve me and charge me more, because somehow I am a perceived risk. And the last thing I'll say about that is just look at the foreclosure crisis that Dr. Spriggs mentioned. Just take a look at that and look at how many people, right, when you accounted for income, education, FICO, how many Black people were still put into loans that were unaffordable when made? So this problem is a lot deeper, and we need to reclaim the narrative, and we need to be able to dispel these myths as many times as we need to, because the idea that the poor should pay more or Black people are a risk just because we're Black is one that it's going to take not just Black people to fight, but everybody to fight, to reclaim the story and to tell the truth. The truth matters.
Wow. Drop the mic, drop the mic, drop the mic. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I'm going to pose a question, and it's really anybody can take a stab at it. How do we see ourselves getting back to true equity? Anyone?
Well, I'll start. I think we have to move from a language that speaks of opportunity and speaks of outcomes. We need to demand the system to expect equal outcomes. And what we have done is we've decided that we'll settle for the illusion of opportunity. Opportunity doesn't mean anything without outcome. And so that means when we think about a credit score that would qualify you for the prime, a regular prime interest rate? Are we intrinsically accepting that that credit score ought to give me lots of white people being accepted and lots of Black people being rejected? If we accept that, then we're building, this is how the system is built in. We are institutionalizing it. I'm not saying Black people are a risk. I'm just saying I think the outcome ought to look like they are a risk. If I accept that, then yes, I'm saying Black people are a risk because I accept that my credit score cutoff ought to give me that outcome. If I look at home appraisals, which, we've seen these very embarrassing stories of simple tests showing the bias in the appraisal. If we don't expect equal outcomes, if we don't demand equal outcomes, then it's hard for us to get to equity. So I think we have to move from opportunity to outcome, and we have to change the narrative. And the result is that, honestly, right, the narrative on the Great Recession that too many people still accept is that the system tried what I just said, that the system gave an honest attempt to give Black people a chance to borrow, and that was a mistake. And our mistake was to believe that we could have equal outcomes, and we should never go back there, which is, as you can see in the data, where we're headed, because the number of loans that are now generated for home purchases that aren't for people with the very highest credit rating has, gone back to very low levels. And so we are accepting this credit score cutoff. We are accepting a scoring that says that Black people are a greater risk. And that has not allowed us to recover the home ownership that we lost, or the damage, the irony, right? The damage that the home ownership loss did to our credit scores, which further embedded this.
Danny, I would like to also address that question, and to Dr. Spriggs' point in Charmaine's systematic racism, when we really think about it, was strategic, it was intentional, and unfortunately, it was very effective. We still see the effects of systematic racism, and we're still victims of systematic racism now. So in order to overcome it, we also too have to be very systematic, strategic, intentional, in order for us to really make change, because it's so complex. I see 4 areas that are important for us to receive true equity. One area is income. It's a fact that African Americans make less for doing the same professions, even if you have the same credentials. I think the stats are somewhere around 70 cents per dollar a Black man makes, compared to a white man, even lower for Black women. I think it's somewhere in the 60-cent range. So it's hard to move forward and gain equity if you do the same work or in the same profession and you can't earn the same amount of money. So I think that has to be addressed. Number 2, it's very important for African Americans to have seed capital. Some people call this reparations and other things of that nature, but it's important when you think about the state of Black America and systematic racism that brought us here. It has to be something that helps us start our businesses. It has to be some form of assistance that helps us with a down payment. Dr. Spriggs mentioned, and Charmaine, about if I didn't have an inherited home that created equity, that created wealth for me, how do I have those initial resources to purchase a home or to actually start a business. So I think number two, very important, is seed capital. Number three is home ownership. 52% of the wealth in the Black community comes from owning a home. And even though this is our greatest asset, our home ownership rates range around 44 to 45% of African Americans that actually own a home. So we as realtors have to continue to do our part in pushing Black home ownership. And lastly, something that's very important that we haven't touched on yet is inheritance. It's so important that if we make the steps to increase our income, we make the steps to get the seed capital to start the businesses, etc., and to buy the homes. But in a lot of cases, we aren't taking the necessary steps to protect our legacy and protect our assets and put it in a position where we can pass it along to our next generation. So it's very important in our wealth, in our equity, that we do our part in terms of inheritance and positioning ourselves to be able to pass wealth along effectively.
Wow. Wow. You hit it right on the head, Madam First Vice. I mean, the things that you talked about as it relates to the income and the inheritance and the homeownership, these are things that we, as from a smaller scale, we can literally start making these changes starting in our homes. I mean, coming from a family where, entrepreneurship wasn't a conversation, home ownership, it was though. Although my dad had a 6th grade education, I never understood how did he buy a house. I've always lived in a house, you know what I mean? And so being in the lending industry now, I look at debt to income ratios and we talk about credit and credit scores and stuff like that. How was he able to acquire that house? And now we're talking about transformation, transforming it to the next generation. So I make a commitment to say, you know what, I didn't come from money, but my kids will. And that's the commitment that we all have to make on this call, that, you know what, we're going to transform this wealth. We're not going to get it, can it, and sit on it, but we're going to actually develop something that we can go from generation to generation to generation. So, I mean, you got me buzzing when you started talking about that, because that's, I'm sorry, that got me aroused. But moving right along, Madeline, tell me some of the things that you guys are doing to intervene. 1 or 2 things that the department is doing, Department of Energy is doing to kind of intervene with this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, I just want to, applaud and echo what everybody has said to answer the last question. I think, paying attention and understanding the full history here is so important. And there's a lot of people who kind of go through the world not really being aware of, ignorant to the history that precedes us. And, I think about, as you said, Danny, earlier on, that, sometimes race is not written into the covenants anymore. But when you went through decades of explicitly racist policies, and then turn them into that allow people, or essentially white people, to accrue wealth and disallow other people from that wealth accrual. And then you change those policies to say, well, now you just have to have wealth in order to get access. The gap makes more sense because you can kind of connect the dots from what's happening. I also noticed somebody in the chat mentioned the book, The Color of Law, which I also highly recommend if folks have not read it and want to read about how all those things connect together. Some of the ways that I think about it, I recognize that Department of Energy has kind of a very specific perspective within this wider ecosystem, but maybe to kind of help connect some dots here, we use a metric called energy burden to measure how much people are paying in their energy per year compared to their income. And we know that the median energy burden across the country for households is about 3%. But when you look at Black households, it rises to about 5.4%. And then when you look at low income households, you look at other subsets of the population, it gets even higher. And this presents an issue. If that's 2% of your income that on average, Black households are paying to energy that white households and other households are not needing to, then that's money that could be going to other places. We also know that rental households in particular face a larger energy burden. Rental households pay about 20% more per square foot in their energy use compared to non-rental households. Part of that problem is the fact that property owners who don't pay the energy bill often don't see an incentive to improve the energy performance of that house. And the person living there can't make that investment, but they're paying the energy bill. And so all of these things trickle into what we see as these larger economic barriers that contribute to people's inability to their own wealth accrual. So you asked me about programs Department of Energy runs on these areas. We have a few different areas that I do want to mention. One, in general, I think one thing in terms of addressing inequity, put quite simply, we have to put resources where there is need. I don't think we do a great job at identifying where there is need and putting resources there. So the Department of Energy has run a program called the Weatherization Assistance Program that's focused on, for the lowest income households, paying for energy upgrades. That's it, just paying for energy upgrades, getting them into better performing households. That program also has access to health and safety funding as well that can help if there's asbestos or other things in the home that could be contributing factors. They can help remediate some of those issues as well. That's a fantastic program. They don't, in my opinion, they don't reach enough households every year. I think there's more resources that could go towards that work, but it is something that exists in every community across the country. We also want to make sure, in talking to NAREB, that people, when they're buying a home, are armed with good information about what energy costs are likely to be. We want to make sure that's going to the buyer. We also want to make sure it's going to the lender, because again, we want to say if a house has high energy bills, it's not to say you can't buy that house, it's to say, let's finance some energy efficiency improvements that then make that house more affordable for you to live in. And we can, well-designed financing policy would say if that efficiency installation pays back over time, we can make that a low barrier to entry in terms of financing, because we know we're going to be in a home that has lower total ownership costs once you are living in that home. So I manage a program called Home Energy Score that's focused on giving information at time of listing to buyers, and we'd love to work with all of you on ways that as realtors, you can be armed with that information and help buyers navigate accessing information, accessing financing, and accessing improvements.
Awesome. Wow. Madeline, we'll make sure that information gets in the chat, guys, so you guys will have it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. That was some really good information that we can use as we're out dealing with our buyers. I want to go to Charmaine. I want to go back to that question. What are some immediate things that we could do to intervene with this challenge we're facing?
That's a great question. And before I answer it, I saw something in the chat about code switching and some really rich comments going on in the chat. And I do want to just say that as Black people, let's not make any apology for being able to go from the streets to the suites. That's cultural competency. When your lived experience allows you to navigate and move across multiple cultures, your lived experience is rich with insight. And a lot of times, some of the solutions that need to be at the table aren't there because we aren't there. There are other people determining what FICO should look like, and we are not at the table. So and I also want to recognize Madeline's point about homeownership sustainability too, because looking at getting in the home, but not what it's going to cost to stay in the home is also something that we have to be mindful of. And when you're at the bottom of the economic rung, you're least likely, when the strong winds blow in life, and they do, you're least likely to be able to hang on to that home ownership. So I also want to recognize that point. But to your question, I think we have to respect the complexity of the problem. I think it starts with really respecting that it took 400 years, and I think Madam First Vice President's point spoke to that, to get us to where we are today. Now, in my role at the Mortgage Bankers Association, right? So I have a job to do as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, to look at what's happening inside of that organization and how are we leading the charge within the industry on all of these issues that we talked about. So in our own workforce, what does it look like to be equitable and inclusive, right? That's a charge that I have. I also have it as it relates to supplier diversity, making sure that opportunities are afforded to Black-owned businesses and others who are legally considered minority, because now that term in some places is controversial. So I want to be clear that it's contextual. So that's my job. I say that to say we need to look at who is responsible and accountable in positions today and hold them accountable. I don't know that we need another task force. We don't really need to put groups together to study this problem ad nauseum, right? Let's demand that the people who are in positions to drive change make change. That's their role. And if they can't do that, then we have to move to people who can. And the last thing I'll say about that, the University of Chicago did a study, and you all may have heard this study referred to before in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, about the resume test, where John and Jamal, with the same exact background, John gets called back and hired 3 times, 4 times more than Jamal. Same background, same qualification. I say that to say that's a problem that is solvable to whomever is responsible for hiring, right? So if you're in an organization where your rich diversity is all at the lower ranks, it's fair to ask your leadership, why is that? Why is that? And what are we going to do to change it? So we each have to start from where we are. I respect that the problem is not simple, and it took a long time for us to get to where we are. But I also believe we need to hold people accountable. When you're being paid to do a job, we need to see results, going back to Dr. Spriggs' point about outcomes. And let's just think about it. You know, we've been looking at corporate America for a really long time and looking at the numbers and the pay equity gap that Madam First Vice President referred to. Still there. Still there. When COVID hit, a lot of people said, oh, Blacks suffer disproportionately. That was always there. COVID illuminated it. So that is what I would offer in response to your question.
Wow, you brought up some interesting dialogue, and it makes me think that, you know, given that I heard Maurice Jordan say one time that when America has a cold, the Black community has pneumonia. And so listening to you talk about the economic impacts and the things that have happened through the years, we had the 2008 foreclosure crisis, right? And that set us back. And so here we have now this COVID situation that a lot of people have not made mortgage payments, especially in the Black community, as well as renters. And so we have homelessness, you know, all of these problems that we are about to face right now. What can we do to get in front of this?
Danny, can I just respond really quickly to that? Because I don't know that that question is for me, but I do want to just connect 2 points. And that is when Dr. Spriggs talked about the crises and you asked the question about the narrative. And that is what that ended up doing, the crisis that you just referred to, it ended up creating this perception that you had a group of undeserving, right? So now Black people don't deserve to own because look what happened when we gave them bad products.
Right.
Right. Look what happened when I put somebody in an option arm.
2%.
There was no way that that was going to be, that was going to end well.
Negative
right?
amortization. Yeah.
Negative am, right? So again, just connecting those dots.
Wow. Dr. Spriggs, you wanna chime in on that? Now I know this was not a question that we rehearsed because that just came to me. So that's why I posed it. So it really wasn't meant for anybody, but anybody that want to take a stab at it, please feel free.
Well, we have to look at what COVID has done. The impact by race has been more than dramatic and different. So for Blacks, cumulatively, so over the course of what we're facing, 700 out of 10,000 of us have been hospitalized because of COVID. Versus for whites, it's a little over 200. So it's well over 3 times the rate of hospitalization. And as we know from this disease, for African Americans, as opposed to whites, the whites who get the disease predominantly get it because the only whites who are confined are those who are elderly and living in elder care situations. So those are the ones who have been overexposed. And when you look at hospitalizations for whites by race, it's well over 60 to 70% or above 65. For Blacks, the majority are under 65. For Blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, this is a working age disease. So it's not just that we are 3 times more likely to have been hospitalized, it's that we were workers who were hospitalized. And so immediately you get, well, how do you pay rent sitting in the hospital for a month or 6 weeks? Some people were in the hospital longer, we know, from this disease. And what is your family doing? And we know of the disparities in insurance. Tragically, for many African Americans, because we're underinsured, we face this conundrum. Social Security was designed to protect a family where the worker was responsible for dependent children. But many of the Blacks who die from COVID are going to be in their 50s. So for many of them, they don't have dependent children. Their children are over 18. And because their wives are not retirement age, then the survivor benefit for the wife isn't going to kick in for a couple of years. The end result is the family gets $200 and some because that's the death benefit. And of course, that's not enough to bury somebody. So this impact of the disease on our ability to work, on our earnings, and the weight that it's left for our families in terms of financial obligations are huge. This is why I get so upset at my fellow economists who don't understand the issue of people's response to risk. Now, as economists, we can measure what unemployment benefits are because that's a number, but we can't measure perceptions of risk. And so, as you've seen, thank goodness the Senate passed the America Recovery Act just a little while ago. Mm-hmm. The heavy debate about should you add money to unemployment insurance the heavy debate about whether we should give $1,400 additional to American households was all around this perception that these are unworthy people. They don't need any help. And it'll lead to bad behavior. They won't want to work. I mean, how often did you hear this phrase that people won't want to work? This is the perpetual stereotype thrown at Black people, right? Y'all don't want to work. If we're good to you, then you won't work. And in this instance, because of the risk that people are perceiving right now, which is, as I pointed out from those statistics about catching the disease and dying, they're existential because it's about, are we going to be alive? And we still, despite what appeared to be kind of good job numbers last month that just got released on Friday, right? We saw the Black unemployment rate went up. The share of Black people holding jobs went down. We're facing an existential risk about, will this jobless gap for us end? And so to hear economists say, oh, if you give them $300, they won't work. We don't have jobs. We don't have access to jobs. We're not sure if we go to work, if we're going to come home alive. We're not sure if we'll come home well. We're living in states where all the governors are saying, take off the masks. But we're the ones who have the jobs who have to be around these people who don't want to wear masks. And so in that environment, if I lose a job, if you want me to spend, you have to provide me with liquidity. And you have to understand the damage you've done to our community. Our community has no liquidity. So an unemployment check that we get, we have to be instantly, how do I borrow from Peter to pay Paul? Because the unemployment check is not going to pay Peter and Paul. And instantly we're into borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. If you don't give me extra money, I'm not spending it, because I also have to worry about the day when I can't borrow from Peter to pay Paul because I borrowed Peter out and there is no money. So you have to give us extra liquidity. And this is the part of the institutional racism, that policies don't make sense when they're done from the perspective of what the Black community faces as a result of this institutional racism. To policymakers, it never makes sense. It doesn't make sense to give people extra money because they're not looking at it from our perspective. And they've built in assumptions about us so that even if they think they're looking from our perspective, oh, it would just make you lazy. You know, you don't want the extra money because then you won't want to show up to work. And then think of how absurd they sounded. If we add $600 to someone's unemployment check, that's more than what they make. And they never checked themselves. They never said, wait, time out. Because the rest of us were doing this, right? If you add 600, it's more than what I make. Isn't the problem what I make?
Thank you.
It's not the $600. The $600 is not the problem here.
Thank you.
And so this is what we confront, because it's this unwillingness to say the policies can be made to make sense from our situation.
And it's
so
not...
we're in for a rough ride because, you know, thank goodness this act passed. We will get a huge amount of relief. It includes a child tax credit that's refundable. Unfortunately, it did not include the minimum wage, but having a $3,000 tax credit for children that's fully refundable is going to make a difference as well.
I was just going to say, it's not the first time too that we've heard the lie about laziness and, you know, we're in the situation because we lack, you know, whatever. It's tied to behavior and culture. We heard it during the foreclosure crisis. I don't know if you all remember the term moral hazard. It was a moral hazard to write down the mortgage for the person in the home. It was better to foreclose, evict, and then sell to an investor by writing down the loan. So I think we have to tell the truth. We have to continue to tell the truth, because that person writing the policy is writing it with a set of assumptions that are not true.
Danny, I want to add to this, and I appreciate Dr. Spriggs so much and Charmaine's point on policy. But I think it's also important that we, as realtors and NAREB, create the business case. And the business case, you know, it's been in the chat, and I've been loving the chat. So thank you, realtors, for sharing with us that America is a capitalistic society, and we all know that. So we have to look at it from another lens and create that business case. Charmaine, you talked about diversity and inclusion and diversity in corporate America. McKinsey did a study in 2020 that said 43% of companies that have a diverse executive team have exhibited more profits. What that means is a company is more profitable if they have diversity across their leadership team. It brings different perspectives that has helped their companies become more profitable. If we look at the housing side, stats show in the next 10 to 15 years, 80% of all new home buyers will be minority. What does that mean? That means that the most income that a lender or a bank can make in home ownership is going to be around marketing to diverse and minority segments. So how do we take that data and take the position that we're in to say it's a good business case to focus on diversity? It's a good business case for a bank or a lender to come up with specific programs designed to get African Americans into homes. I think this moment that we're in time creates what I call a perfect storm. When you think about a perfect storm, and I live in Houston, so we have hurricanes. And one of the things that the weather companies look at is the temperature of the water, the rate of the wind, and all of these factors that come together. And every once in a while, a perfect storm is created that creates a Hurricane Katrina or a Hurricane Harvey. When we look at real change that has happened in our societies over the years, you have seen perfect storms. The Fair Housing Act, which NAREB was very instrumental in, went before Congress in 1963, wasn't passed. When in 1966 was not passed. When in 1967 was not passed. It was not until the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King and the whole country was in distress that in 1968, the Fair Housing Act passed. But it was that perfect storm that created that final change and that major movement. When I think about George Floyd's death in 2020, I feel like that was a perfect storm. We're in a worldwide pandemic. So many jobs have been lost. The effects of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, it was just the final straw that created this movement. And I feel like the movement that we're in, if we keep pushing, can be the moment that we really push for equity. 1968 was instrumental for equality. That's where Blacks can live anywhere. We can go anywhere. There was no more signs that said you have to go to the back of the bus. But now in 2021, it's a different movement that we need to have. And that movement is around equity. And how do we create a more equitable society? How do we push for a more equitable society? So I really think creating the business case then, along with policy, is how we actually move the needle forward. And I totally agree. We have studied it. We have analyzed it. It is proven. It is a fact. Now it's time to move towards how do we create the business case and the policy to make instrumental change.
Wow, great point. Great point. I want to, before we get away with, we got to stay on time, but I want to open up we could take a couple of questions. I want to open it up a little bit and take a couple of questions from the audience just to get some feedback. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. we will present that question for an answer.
We have a good one from Christy Thomas, their VP. How do we attain and maintain a positive outlook when we consider all of the challenges that our communities face?
So I don't have a perfect answer, but two things. What's the alternative? And we're worth the fight. You're worth the fight. In fact, for all of us to be where we are today, somebody fought for us. We, first Vice President talked about Dr. King, you know, Fair Housing Act, Civil Rights Act, Voter Rights Act. A lot of people thought we were worth it. And so I cannot think of a more worthy cause than to do our part. And as my good friend Susan Taylor said, surely this is not the roughest side of the mountain. So we are standing on the shoulders, but we too have to have shoulders for others to stand on. So when you get up in the morning and your feet hit the floor, let the devil know.
Okay, we have a realtist who, Madeline Salzman, if you could expound a little bit more on the name of the program, the energy program that you spoke of earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, and thank you also, Charmaine, for how to maintain a positive outlook. I think, you know, with a lot of these things, you dig into all the issues and it is very overwhelming. I'll just add to that, you know, I think what ends up being most helpful for me is to surround myself with people who are thinking about these things as well and trying to get hands dirty into these problems. I think, yeah, having other people to talk to in all of these issues is always, I think it doesn't do everything, but it helps. As far as DOE's programs go, so I mentioned the Weatherization Assistance Program, and I can put a link into the chat there in just a moment. And that's focused on home upgrades for lower income households. Each state has its own income cutoff, so I can't, you know, make a blanket statement for who is eligible nationwide. But that, as I mentioned, includes efforts to kind of winterize your housing. So, you know, air seal, insulation, stuff so that it's less drafty. That type of work also can help with indoor air quality. If you think about if your air is moving through your house, you know, through the floor, you don't know what's underneath the floor, and you can kind of have more reliability of where the airflow is moving in your home. So it connects to health outcomes we observe in people as well. I'll also mention, you know, because that is an income eligible program, there are a variety of other programs as well. We, you know, we work with utilities. Many utilities offer energy efficiency programs. So I do recommend checking out what your local utility might be offering in that space. They're often underutilized because I think a lot of people just don't know that the resources exist. And, you know, reminding clients about the types of resources that are available like that. And we're also working on a variety of financing mechanisms that I think can be incorporated into the home purchase process. So there are some products that already exist that I think can be expanded upon. And those are associated with the Home Energy Score program. But yeah, I think one thing I'll just mention about financing is where, you know, with all of these things, the details are really what matters in terms of protecting people and, you know, making sure everybody's getting what they need. And one of the things that I love about working on efficiency in general is that, you know, so many things that you can pay up front for don't give you cash flow. You know, it's almost like starting a tiny business in your house of let's improve the energy features, and then I will have a more stable monthly allowance. And so that can create opportunities for, I think, some really exciting mechanisms that you can pay less from day one and access a more affordable and healthy home.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another question we had from Realtor Sister Cynthia G. You all mentioned earlier The Color of Law is a good read to expound upon this whole topic. And she wants to know of the panelists, what author or what book do you recommend, or books do you recommend that we read to become more informed on this amazing topic?
I would recommend Isabel Wilkerson, Caste, C-A-S-T-E.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yes, I would recommend that realtors review the McKinsey and Company Black America report that came out in 2020. Some of the stats that I shared came from that particular document.
Thank you. Those
Anyone
are
else?
Yeah, that's all we had in terms
There are
of questions.
wonderful pieces you should follow from the Du Bois Institute at Duke, headed Du Bois Cook Institute at Duke, headed by William Sandy Darity, and works that have been done with one of his co-authors, Derek Hamilton, who is at the New School. And the Urban Institute has a wonderful series that has been out this February on the Black-White Home Ownership Gap that provide you with deep statistics that are very helpful in understanding the depth of the problem.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for such great information. I mean, realtors, I know you guys are, your minds are thinking right now. You really, the wheels are turning. Why? Because they really gave us the sad truth, y'all, that we have to be intentional. We got to go back. And I thank you, panelists, for just keeping it real with us. Charmaine, I thank you for the soil and the seed. Madeline, I thank you for your energy tips and the SCORE program and things along those lines. I thank you, Madam Courtney Rose, for just being intentional and the things that you shared. And Dr. Spriggs, you just dropped so many nuggets in terms of opportunities, don't mean outcomes, and just things along those lines. It's just, to me, you had such great information that we can build upon. I mean, I'm reminded of a story that I read about Black Wall Street, where over 600 African Americans, 21 churches, 30 grocery stores, 20 restaurants, 2 movie theaters, a hospital, a bank, a library, even a bus system. They were all thriving in the 1950s, which created this self-sufficiency. It created the soil and the seed in Tulsa. And the city was bombed, and many people talk about the bombing. We focus on the bombing of the city, but what we lose sight on was the birth of the city. This was all birthed because of one Black entrepreneur by the name of W.O.W. Gurley. He was an entrepreneur that owned the land, and he was intentional about saying that, I'm not going to allow my land to be used or sold to anyone outside of my culture. So we have to now take this information that we have, and we have to become intentional about creating opportunities for our community to grow Black businesses, to create Black home ownership, to close the wealth gap in our communities. And it starts right here with NAREB. And I really thank you, panelists, for sharing such great information. I'm empowered, I'm inspired, and I'm looking forward to more information. I'm sharpening up my axe. I'm sharpening up my axe, y'all. So, let's go into this. We have another session coming up. Remember, please, thank you, realtors. Thank you, everyone. Our next section is coming up, the Business Development and Empowerment session, which starts at 2:30. We have 20 minutes to break. We have, how many minutes? Wait, I'm sorry.
16 minutes.
16 minutes, y'all. We have 16 minutes. I want to turn it back over to our Madam President-elect to come back and greet us. I'm just Madam President-elect.
Wow, I'm just, so empowered what happened today. Just listening to the panelists, when you talk about the social injustices and the inequalities. And, I think Maurice Jordan said one thing when you were talking about what Maurice stated. He said, we are non-apologetic. These are things that, are issues that we have to address. It's real. We walk it, we live it, we talk it, we speak about it. And many of us, experience, what's happening when it comes to the inequality, when it comes to housing. So this panel was just phenomenal. And just the information, Dr. Spriggs, Madeline, our first Vice President, Charmaine, I mean, you all just really put things in perspective and provided each area and each aspect as it identifies, the crisis and the narrative on home ownership. So again, I want to personally thank each and every one of you for just expressing just not your viewpoint, but your heart into where we are, where we stand, and where we're going. Because if we don't put policies in place, and I think that goes into our second vice president's area when it comes to government affairs, if we don't put policies in place, if we don't speak or walk the walk or talk the talk, we're going to be going backwards in life. So we have to move forward. But I just think that it was just a wonderful panel. I mean, I didn't even need any coffee. You guys woke me up when you were talking about this. This just really just enlightened, I think, the entire panel that's on here today. So again, I'm just overwhelmed with the information. I want to thank each and every one of you. And I'll turn it back over to Jill, who's going to direct us to, I guess, our next panel.
Yes, ma'am. The next segment is the Business Development and Empowerment segment. We have 4 amazing sessions lined up for you on tax liens and property management and a partner update and just amazing stuff. I'm going to put the link down here again to make it easy for you to just click the link, and we'll see you all at 2:30.
Thank you so much. I wouldn't want to do this work without you. Take care.
Thank you,
Yes, thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Spriggs.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Great job, Danny. Thank you.
Yeah, this has been lovely. Thank you.
Danny, great job. Awesome.
Yes,
job.
yes.
Thank you.
Amazing questions. Thank you all.